Hello, I'm Macauley Peterson, Editor-in-Chief of Chess-Based News. Ben is off teaching a scholastic camp this week and asked me to guest host a bit for the summer. We're going to be speaking with two prominent figures in the chess world who are active in FIDE presidential politics. As many of you will know, this is an election year for the sport's governing body, and delegates from all member federations will come together in Batumi, that's in the Republic of Georgia, on October 3rd to vote for the next administration for FIDE. My first guest is English Grandmaster Nigel Short. Nigel has been an elite player for around 40 years. At 14, he was the youngest international master in history at that time. In 1980, he finished clear second in the World Junior Championship behind Garry Kasparov. 13 years later, he challenged Kasparov in a World Championship match in London. He's won the British Championship 3 times and represented England in 17 chess Olympiads, if my count is correct. He's reached number 3 in the world rankings and remains among the top 100 players in the world today. Nigel is also a prolific chess columnist and commentator, known for his sense of humor, erudition, and as a global ambassador of sorts for the game. He's also running in the election for FIDE President later this year. So, without further ado, I bring you Grandmaster Nigel Short. Nigel, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Macauley.
We, of course, want to talk about FIDE politics, but first I'd like to ask you about something that first brought your name into the New York Times, which was January 20th, 1976, page 48, when a boy of just 10 years won a simultaneous exhibition game against the great Viktor Korchnoi.
Yeah.
What do you still remember from that experience?
It was a similar. The Russians had they often participated in the Hastings event, and then people stayed on afterwards. The previous year, I was 9 years old. I was in the group of the second group of juniors. I wasn't considered to be a top junior, so the top juniors played against Alexander Belyevsky, and I played against Raphael Vaganyan, and he just absolutely wiped the floor with me. I was just annihilated in no time. Unfortunately, I don't have the score of that particular game. Following year, well, kids are improving quite quickly. I remember the experience quite well. It was a very, very long day, because we'd driven down to London to participate in this thing. And
were you still just west of Manchester?
Yeah, that's right. So in the northwest of from the northwest of England, and the game went on for hours. It really did. I mean, it was I don't remember, but it was basically the whole day and going on. And if you look at the game now, you can see that my opening play was very, very primitive. I basically had no idea what I was doing.
But you were 10.
Yeah, I was 10. And then I started to outplay him in the middle game and the end game. I mean, when he resigned, if you look at the position, I'm just completely winning. But I was still surprised at the time. It's very often that you can't believe that you have won a game like that.
One thing that I noticed incidentally from this article is that it notes that Korchnoi was at the apex of his chess career in late 1974 when he played the semi-final in the elimination matches for the World Championship and lost to Karpov. But it's funny because, of course, then he lost a match for the World Championship to Karpov 2 years later.
Yeah, and he lost in Murano as well in 1981. So he had those 3 successive matches, and Karpov was clearly his nemesis.
And you just turned 53 a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Talking about the apex of a career when it comes to Korchnoi, he's perhaps an outlier, but he continued to play actively into his 80s. Yeah. So that's, I guess, can also draw inspiration a little bit for you.
This year I've, because I've taken a different, slightly different turn in my career, things are a little bit different, but I'm still intending to play chess, and I will play one more event before the FIDE election. I'll play in Abu Dhabi, and I think I want more of a focus on enjoying myself. Sometimes I get these invitations, and you think, okay, maybe a chance to pick up a little bit of money here, but I'm turning towards pleasure, just having more fun, and I think I'm playing. I play better if I'm in a conducive environment for that. I had a bit of a slip. I mean, towards the end of last year, my rating touched 2,700, and I'd lost quite a lot of points since then. My last event in Kolkata, things were starting to improve, and there are some signs that I'm recovering my form. So I'm not sure I'll be playing quite at Viktor Korchnoy's age, but I think as long as I'm enjoying the game and learning new things, then I don't see why I shouldn't go on.
But now you've decided to take a turn towards FIDE politics. I mean, you've been involved in FIDE politics, of course, for many years, as a supporter in the last election of Kasparov, although not actually part of the ticket formally. So far, your announcement and public statements have focused primarily on voting out Kirsan Ilyumzhinov, understandably, who has been the president for 2 decades now, but also arguing that his deputy, Georgios Makropoulos, is the continuity candidate.
Yes, that's right. Continuity Kirsan.
The Makropoulos team, by contrast, probably now would be arguing that they're interested in reforming FIDE from within.
That's absolute nonsense. So if you look at their team, it's composed of the same guys who, I mean, all the team apart from Malcolm Payne owe their positions to their fealty to Kirsan Ilyumzhinov, and they are the people, particularly Makropoulos, who has sat by Kirsan whilst he's lied to the General Assembly with his false promises. They have manipulated things. There has been vote rigging in elections. You've had federations which have been disenfranchised illegally, in my opinion. You've had all of this stuff going on. And it is absurd to think that Makropoulos is now a reform candidate. After 23 years, he pronounces himself in favour of term limits. After 15 years of Kirsan being in power, the presidential board, actually led by Makropoulos, vetoed a proposal of the Ukrainian Federation. It was there before the General Assembly, and the presidential board recommended to the General Assembly that they ignore that. So just because it's politically expedient of him to present something new now, it doesn't mean there's a real change of heart.
What was the reason for vetoing it at the time, and is there a case to be made that they changed their mind?
Naked power, that's all.
Presumably not the one they gave to the General Assembly, though.
No, it's just holding on to power, and we've got a different situation now, because my view is that the Makropoulos team is short of money. It's not just me saying, they're actually saying it themselves. So Makropoulos, he's a great manipulator, enabler behind the scenes, but there are other people who could lead this particular ticket. And I think in order to obtain their support, he had to promise to get out of the way, that he would not stay on forever. When somebody is providing funds the term limits are neither here nor there. People are they're on their gravy train. But in this situation, they have rallied behind Makro for this election, but with a clear understanding he gets out of the way at some point and somebody else will have a go. And that will also be a very, very interesting case. Malcolm Payne presents himself, he's already been speaking about running in 2022. That is assuming the Makropoulos team wins, which is very, very far from being a foregone conclusion. But the idea that this group of people are just going to anoint Malcolm as their new leader, president, or whatever, is absurd. There are very, very ambitious people in that group, and there will be a hell of a fight. So, my dear countryman, I think, is allowing himself to be used, and I think he's very naive, to be honest. He has been around in chess all his life. It's as a journalist and many, many things. Of course, he's been doing the London Chess Classic and all sorts of things. But as regards FIDE politics, he's relatively new.
So if I understand, you're saying that even despite his good intentions, even if they do win the election and do enact term limits, that there are going to be other people who are going to be looking to sideline Malcolm before 2022. You bet.
Absolutely. That's 100%. We had dinner with him the other evening, and I was sort of laughing at the naivety of this. Yes, there will be other people, and I could even name several people who would be in contention for that. So this group for the moment are quite willing to allow Malcolm to put forward his case. Their fight will come later. He's the only one there who is a fresh face, and it's very important for them to try and distinguish themselves from Kirsan continuity. So they give him space and encourage him. Makropoulos has been retweeting him, actually. That's giving encouragement to his running in 2022.
And he's only been on Twitter for about 5 minutes.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's another thing which is quite funny, and I don't think he's particularly good at this medium.
Well, one of the things on the Perpetual podcast is they have patrons who support the show, and they are able to send in some questions. And so we got one question, which I think is probably something on the minds of a lot of people, from Peter Merrifield, who sort of inverts the question of why are you running for president. Obviously, there's the anti-Kirsan, anti-Makropoulos continuity argument, but what do you have that makes you the right candidate for FIDE president?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing that I would like to do is to invert the model of how FIDE is run. In fact, the model is basically the current model is the exact opposite of how successful sporting organisations are run. They attract commercial sponsorship to the centre. So, FIFA is a very, very wealthy organisation, and then FIFA distributes funds outwards. The model for FIDE is the federations support the centre, and it's a rent-seeking model. They occupy the space and they simply tax everybody for it. So if you want to organise a rated tournament, you pay for that, and you pay €1 per player, getting the thing rated. If you want to be an arbiter, then you're paying for that. If you want to be a trainer, you're paying for that. It's a rent-seeking model. they're not contributing, they're actually detracting and inhibiting chess activity. So this is the fundamental thing, is to attract commercial sponsorship, and you cannot attract commercial sponsorship unless you restore the reputation of the organization. If you Google FIDE now and you Google the current FIDE president, you see scandals and you see all sorts of things that would immediately put you off being associated with the organization. So I intend to restore integrity and clean up the organization. And I believe that there are an awful lot of companies out there who would be very willing to be associated with chess. And just to give a couple of examples of, CEOs or, important figures who we've seen involved in chess, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg playing against Magnus Carlsen. You have important people like Demis Hassapis, who, working at Google. Now, these are massive companies, and are they sponsoring chess? Google has now had some sort of limited involvement. Now, there are great opportunities for increasing the revenue of the organization by millions. And if we compare to other sporting bodies, like obviously we shouldn't compare ourselves to football, that would be nonsensical, but we have a fraction of the budget of cycling, for instance. It is a tiny fraction of the annual budget, despite the fact we have 189 member federations and literally millions of people who know how to play the game, and 650,000 people on the ELO list. The model is, just talking about the ELO list, by the way, that a normal thing to do is to get commercial sponsorship for the ELO list. You don't charge people for getting things rated. When you have a database of 650,000 often quite intelligent people there in a particular interest group, companies, they are delighted to be associated with things like that, and to run that. In cricket or whatever, these things, they're all commercially done. It brings in revenue for the administration, and they are not, the current administration are not commercially minded at all. They just have a very, very limited negative view. Basically, screw the players. We're going to screw every single penny possible out of the players. And I travel extensively around the world, and I see the effect that this has. I've been to something like 120 countries, and okay, I was just in Nigeria now, and we had a Blitz tournament, 9-round Blitz tournament, and they said it wasn't going to be rated. So I went and asked about this. Why not? It gives it more prestige, it gives it more meaning if you rate the event. So they decided to do that, and there was an announcement made. The entire room burst into applause, spontaneous applause. These people who, they care about these things. They like to measure or have their performances measured. And why isn't it done? It's because of this small tax. paying €1 per player and all of this. It may not sound very much, but in some countries it makes a big difference. And in South Africa, they have a colossal number of nationally rated events. Only a small proportion of those are ELO rated because of the costs. In the Philippines, it is the same. There is a tremendous amount of chess activity goes on in places like the Philippines, and you will not necessarily be aware of it because these things are nationally rated, if they are rated at all, and we have to bring them in. I played a tournament last year where I was playing, it was a tournament with 6 grandmasters, a number of IMs, and in round 7 of that event on board 1, I was playing an unrated player. Now, can you tell me, can you name some tournament in Europe, for instance, where I would be playing an unrated player on board 1 in a tournament with several grandmasters and IMs? It's absolutely inconceivable. It just cannot happen. Mm-hmm. But there it can, because you have guys who can play, and they can play quite well, but they somehow escape the system. And this is all a consequence of the taxation policy instituted by Makropoulos and co.
So it's not so much that the member federations aren't getting their money's worth from FIDE, but that the entire concept of paying for services from FIDE is wrong.
Yeah, that's it. That is basically it. I mean, FIDE should be encouraging chess, not discouraging it.
Okay. There was a lot to unpack there, but just to circle back to, well, one of the principal questions about restoring the reputation of FIDE with an eye towards attracting sponsorship. What do you get if you Google Nigel Short? What is going to be the difference that people are going to see? I mean, they'll see stuff about your World Championship career. They'll see stuff about your travel. What do you hope to be the thing that's going to bring in sponsors?
Well, a lack of criminal convictions. Maybe. No. Well, okay. To be fair, even Kirsan has not had any convictions, but he has appeared on the and is on the U.S. Treasury Department sanctions list. So that is a massive problem, and you can't run an organisation without a bank account. And by the way, what has Makropoulos and Siegel and all these other useless individuals on the presidential board, what have they been doing since November 2015?
When they ostensibly actually had all the authority.
Yeah. I mean, what they should have done is force a vote and to get Kirsan removed, because it was clear this was an existential threat to FIDE.
And they could have done that at the General Assembly.
They could have done it exactly, but they procrastinated, and you saw them. Up until April 30th, 2018, they were scrambling to put in arrangements at the last minute, and not very satisfactory arrangements either, to prevent them having their assets frozen. So that shows lack of planning, lack of foresight on their part. They have allowed Kirsan to lie through his teeth. You will recall he stepped down in order to clear his name in the US, and you may remember he made a lot of headlines saying he was going to sue the US government for $50 billion. There is no such case. There never has been such a case. It was obvious there was never going to be such a case because there were no grounds for this. And FIDE FIDE, or by FIDE I mean Makropoulos and the rest of that group, they have stood by him and not contradicted Kirsan. They promoted a fiction that he was attempting to deal with this particular problem. And that is it's one of the issues with the body. They knew damn well he wasn't going to court, but they were just happy enough to pretend to the world that he was trying to clear his name.
Might they argue that the reason for doing that was to try to protect FIDE in some way, essentially trying to have it not be associated with these particular lies of Kirsan?
No, I think the way to protect FIDE is to get rid of him, just straight off. And if he says, he's taking the US government to court, you say, where's the evidence for this?
And that was feasible, that was possible.
Of course it was.
So the only reason that it didn't happen was that they didn't want it.
They didn't want to, yeah. Makropoulos has sat there over the decades next to Kirsan while he has lied. When he got up in the General Assembly 2014 and said, if elected, I will put $20 million into the FIDE accounts today. Makropoulos sits there, smiles, applauds with the rest of the assembly, and of course
nothing
happened. And then he admitted, and the exact term he used was this was bullshit. So, they're dishonest. Makropoulos is a beneficiary of this lies and deceit. And he's quite happy to encourage it. So when Kirsan says $50 billion court case, when there is no court case anywhere, he goes along with it. So let's start talking straight. Let's have some truth finally in the organisation and not put up with nonsense like this.
Well, straight talk is definitely something that you're known for on a variety of subjects. How important is it, being a professional player, in your mind, to be able to represent the players' interests in FIDE?
I think it is important. I mean, I have some views on certain things. I have quirky views. I have quirky views on things like stalemate. Obviously, this is not going to be. There is not going to be a rule change introduced. I just want to kill that one before it's because I've heard people discussing these things. There will not be a rule change while I'm
under a short administration.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely not. Although I'd be interested to see some experiments with this in a tournament. I actually don't think it will make that much difference, but it will make a difference. But much more important things. I think a lot of the rules, and I've written about this several times, a lot of the rules need to be updated. You have rule changes where things, you're now allowed to make illegal moves in Blitz without losing automatically. And I think for Blitz, this is, you can't do this actually. That it interrupts the flow. A penalty for making an illegal move is not enough. There are many issues like that. I want to see proper arbiters. Arbiters are vast majority of arbiters are not competent enough. I put it at 25% maximum people who are fit to do things. And when we're having tough events, like rapid and blitz events, you need top quality arbiters. They have used arbiting as a way of rewarding people. We see this at the Olympiad. We actually have lower quality arbiters at the Olympiad than we do for regular events, because there are people invited. Some of them are there on competence grounds, but a large number are on political grounds, and they barely know the rules.
Well, you need so many arbiters for the Olympiad too.
Well, you do need, but the quality is very low. There are people who don't know how to set the clocks. That is very much a minority. But there are a huge number of people who wouldn't recognise a threefold repetition if it occurred in front of their eyes. And, just as in football, you wouldn't have some 120-kilogram, 65-year-old guy appointed as a referee trying to keep up with the ball. In the same way with chess, you ought to have people who can follow the game at high speed, by the way, and make correct decisions. So those are issues which I care about. And another thing I would do, I would be very, very harsh on people who are found guilty of cheating. And I think there has been very little willingness to deal with measures like this.
So the handful of cases in the Ethics Commission that have resulted in, let's say, 2-year bans is too small, not harsh enough?
If you've got 2 cases, let's say, during the course of your career, that should be a lifetime ban. And in fact, cheating in chess is much more serious than it is in many other sports, because, Lance Armstrong, he had all his laboratories and blood doping and all of that. You could give me all the same, and I will never ever win the Tour de France. At least the guy could actually cycle. But with chess, you actually don't even need any real ability at all. You can, I could teach my dog to win a tournament like this using a computer. So this is the basic problem, that you need no ability. They're so damn powerful that the punishments have to be draconian and lifetime bans for people. And it's even a little bit like I've often wondered, and this is just off the top of my head, whether legally people can be prosecuted for fraud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the difficulty is always, well, what are the standards of evidence required to initiate such draconian measures?
Yeah,
I guess that would have to be a pretty high bar. That
is correct.
You catch the guy with a phone in his hand, looking at the position.
Yes.
But in general, you think that cheating is actually more of a problem than most in the sport?
I think it. I think it is an issue. And in some countries it's a very serious issue. In some places it happens pretty regularly that people are cheating, and administrations are not taking this seriously enough. So I think there have to be punishments on a national level, but I think the World Federation has to lead by example.
Mm-hmm. What about prearranged draws, which is not exactly the same as cheating, but a form of collusion? This has been in the news lately with some comments from Magnus Carlsen in Norway, and I know from talking to many people, even people who generally, one would say is a person of integrity, there is a little bit of a laissez-faire attitude among some players with regards to prearranging draws.
I'll admit I have done this myself. You will see this in my chess career, and my views have changed actually over the years. That because it was commonplace, it was accepted in many tournaments. I've been to tournaments where, people show up with their in their tennis gear with tennis rackets, play 10, 12 perfunctory moves, and off they go to the court. I've seen this go on, and I'm very glad that these rules, Sophia rules, have come in place. I think this was one of the great innovations in chess, a requirement to play a minimum number of moves.
But does that actually solve the problem of pre-arranged draws, or just force you to compose a game?
It doesn't, and it is actually quite difficult to eliminate it. It's possible to take a harsher line on this. It would require a little bit of thought, and I must admit I haven't thought about it sufficiently.
What about requiring a result every round, like playing a tie-break Blitz game in advance of a classical round, or conversely having a draw then be replayed as a rapid game with reversed colors?
No.
Too complicated?
It's too complicated. I mean, these sort of having draws replayed. I mean, they were going on in London 1883. I mean, all of these things have been tried before and rejected ultimately, because you end up with some people playing many more games. If you're replaying draws, draw is a legitimate result.
So you need some other way to disincentivize the behavior.
I don't consider this to be the biggest problem in chess right now. There are many other things. So it is an issue. I think it's a low priority.
Okay. What kind of people are you looking for on your team, on your ticket?
People with integrity. Yeah. Skills and integrity. That's and people with long associations with chess. People who actually love the game. That was always one of the problems with Kirsan, that being president of FIDE was a cover for his business activities. So this provided an opportunity for him to go around the world, negotiate deals, and people, I think, they would be very surprised at the number of deals that have been negotiated by Kirsan in connection with the awarding of various tournaments. So it's not an accident that world championships have taken place in places like Tripoli. This has given opportunities for sanctions busting, and I happen to know that was what was involved in that particular deal with that world championship. So basically, chess has been used by people conducting their own business affairs, and that's got to go. Mm-hmm. That whole thing has got to disappear. That chess should be paramount. And if you go to the FIDE website, if you have a look on the FIDE website, by the way, you would get the idea that the main purpose of FIDE is to conduct arbiters seminars and training seminars. You've looked at it, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, they're just listed one after another. It's just business, and the chess, the beauty of chess is somewhere lost and forgotten amongst this. In chess, the officials consider themselves to be more important than the players. You don't get this in other sports, or at least they try and disguise it much better. Yeah. The players are the stars, and the players should be the stars.
Okay. Recently, we had the news that there's going to be a new candidate, Arkady Dvorkovich, who does have some chess bona fides as the chairman of the organizing committee of the World Championship match in Sochi, and also he's the chairman of the organizing committee, I believe, of the current World Cup in Russia, FIFA World Cup, that is, not the chess one. He's also very connected politically in Russia. He was the deputy prime minister under Dmitry Medvedev. And in his announcement, it appeared that he was consulting with the country's leadership, quote unquote.
Putin is the... He didn't say Putin, but it was pretty clear who he was talking about.
And with the backing also of the Russian Chess Federation, it certainly looks as though you may not actually be running against Kirsan Ilyumzhinov at all.
Yeah, I would be very surprised to see Kirsan running with this latest announcement. It's not impossible, but it would be exceptionally foolish on his part, on Kirsan's part, to run against the will of the Kremlin. And I think we've had indications over the last month or so anyway. Kirsan has gone incredibly quiet. I mean, he's been invisible. He's been as invisible as Glenn Stark. And
maybe more so.
More so on this campaign. The last time he did something very, very active and visible was when he got the lukewarm backing of the Russian Federation, but it's clear there have been some behind-the-scenes manoeuvres, and he's just been quietly sidelined. So, look, I am, at least 90% sure we will not see Kirsan. And you're right, Dvorkovich. He's apparently quite a reasonable chess player himself. I haven't seen this, but his father was very much a known figure within the chess, international arbiter. I saw him at many events, and so he's not coming in as a complete outsider at all. He's a much more dangerous candidate than Kirsan. I mean, I think Kirsan was clearly going down. Absolutely no doubt that he was finished. He would not have been re-elected at all. Lost so much ground since over the last 4 years, and as I've written, a Kirsan re-election, even supposing this could happen, is probably the end of FIDE. And I'm not being over dramatic, apocalyptic about that. You cannot elect or re-elect a guy who's on the US Treasury Department sanctions list, and you can't open a bank account anywhere. So it's very, very clear that FIDE would not have made it to its centenary.
Well, with that in mind, then, it certainly would appear that this is a bid to try to have the Russian influence in FIDE persist.
Correct.
And Kirsan benefited tremendously from that in the past, so one imagines that those benefits will accrue to Dvorkovich.
We know already that Russian embassies have been active in contacting federations to support our candidate. We now know who their candidate is, Dvorkovich, but that has been recent. So and we can expect that on a grand scale around the world. And this will also be a question of for federations whether they wish to give their vote to basically an agent of the Russian government and to play along with Russian soft power, to allow them to control this body in perpetuity, which is clear. It's clear that this is their intention.
Well, obviously, you can carve out the election in terms of that question, whether or not you want Russian involvement or not. But then, even if the answer is no, you don't want Russian domination of the Federation, then you would still have two choices. So how are you going to persuade the voters that you have a better chance of, let's say, beating back at this challenge from Dvorkovich?
I'll put forward my vision for change, and I've talked about some of the things, and basically my main idea is bringing a lot more money into the game and doing away with taxation. And even if you're in a country like this, I mean, we're in Belgium and they have activities, having a reduction of some thousands of euros in payments that are required to FIDE makes a difference. Even in a place like this, a relatively affluent country, and I think federations will recognise this and support this. I think also there is an acknowledgement that things have been wrong, they've been rotten for far too long, and this is a golden opportunity to bring in real change, real ideas. There are so many reforms which are required. There are reforms required within the body itself, connected with voting, by the way. I mean, one of the things I would like to do, you mentioned term limits, but I'd like to do away with proxies. This has been greatly abused.
This is the idea that delegates can vote without being physically present.
Yeah, but I mean, why should Georgios Makropoulos cast the vote of Laos as he did in the last election? Why would the delegate or the president, from the Laos Federation, who is physically present, hand over his vote to a person who probably couldn't even find Laos on the map? Tell me. Only
some underhanded dealings.
Well, yeah, clearly. I mean, you normally wouldn't do this unless you had been promised something or you had been given something. Why else? When you're physically there, you can vote yourself. Why do you give it to a guy who knows absolutely nothing about your country? It's clear. It's as a payment, really, for something else which you have been offered or given.
What would be needed to do away with proxies? Would that be something the General Assembly has to vote on?
The General Assembly, you have to change the statutes on things like this. And there's been a lot of talk over the years on the voting, and people have said that larger federations should have more votes than smaller federations. I don't support this idea at all. I'm totally against it. But one thing I'm definitely in favour of is putting in a minimum requirement, bare minimum requirement, for FIDE to recognise different federations.
What does that minimum requirement look like?
Well, it's based on three things. That they have got to they've got to have elections. You've got to have they've got to have statutes, and they've got to have accounts. Now, I don't think it is for the central body to describe in detail exactly how these federations are run. There are cultural differences, different setups in different countries, but this isn't just an absolute minimum. Mm-hmm. They've got to have regular elections, statutes, rules, and they need accounts. Where is the money going within a federation? And if they can't provide that, and incidentally that includes some very long-established federations. I mean, Japan Chess Association basically has none of these things. And they always vote for Kirsan, or they always have voted for Kirsan. And that tends to be the case. The less democratic, the less responsible the federations are, the more likely these votes are to go for the incumbent. But this is just a simple level of governance. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say, here is a blueprint, it has to be exactly according to this, but a bare minimum requirement. We know there are federations which are little more than family affairs. One guy as the president, his son as the general secretary, the wife here, next door neighbour, and the dog as the treasurer. That's how it goes. And there's one federation which I could name. I think it's basically a one-man show. This has got to stop. I mean, this is an abuse of the electoral process. Mm-hmm. So there will be a number of reforms of this nature.
Well, and you have visited upwards of 125 countries, including...
120.
Oh, my mistake.
Yeah.
And how many was it in Africa?
24.
24 countries. So you have first-hand experience of seeing how many federations, large and small, function.
Yeah, I do. And I mean, all over the world, and it is not. The problems are not confined to a particular region. This is it's all over. So, as I say, Japan. People sometimes think, oh well, having I've heard the comment, having statutes, that is discrimination against poor countries. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. That's just a bare minimum. And as I say, that you've got your Japan Chess Association. Japan, one of the richest, largest economies in the world, completely and utterly unrepresentative. And that sort of abuse must be stopped. And there's been no willingness whatsoever. The system has been rotten for so long, and it's been encouraged to be rotten for so long that people stand there. I mean, I'll just tell you, 2010 we see these abuses going on in the voting. We had a delegate from Peru at the General Assembly. His federation, recognised by the Peruvian government, Peruvian Sports Ministry, he has all documents there proving that this guy is the representative of chess in Peru. Kirsan stands up at the General Assembly and said, well, I was there in Lima, I met this guy, blah, 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 I spoke to this guy, and he is the representative. No paper, no documents, no nothing. Makes a long speech on this, and then says, well, we'll get the General Assembly to vote on who is the delegate. Who do they vote for? They vote for the non-representative, because, of course, it's a Kirsan vote. Mm-hmm. So it's theft. It's theft in broad daylight. And, I mean, it's disgusting that these things happen.
And how can we prevent them from happening in this election?
Yeah, well, it will be an issue. It will be an issue. I mean, there were numerous irregularities in the previous election. I mean, there was a clear case with the Federation of Gabon, which was disenfranchised, despite having government recognition and despite having been a FIDE member for a number of years. They then went and recognised an illegitimate body, I believe, with an Egyptian as the head. And this is the same. It's the same principle, like that of the school ground bully. School ground bully. He goes there and he beats up some small kid in plain view of everyone else, and he makes sure people see that he's beating up the kid. And the message is very clear: you mess with me, the same thing can happen to you. And that is how these guys have been operating, Makro and Kirsan. So that has been, the way things have been done. Now, what's going to happen this time? We'll see. But I think the fact that there are three horses improves the situation. It's not us and them. There are different interests. So if one side is trying to cheat, other two sides can step in to prevent this or to try and prevent it. So, I'm sure there will be attempts at skullduggery. I suspect it will not be as bad as it was in 2014.
All right, well, it's sure to be an interesting few months. I'm sure there's much more we could talk about, but you've got to get to a commentary gig.
Yeah, I do.
In Leuven for the last day of the Blitz portion of the first Grand Chess Tour event. So thank you very much, Nigel.
Thanks, Macauley.
And best of luck to you.
Yeah, cheers.
The new Perpetual Chess theme music is courtesy of Geert Vanderveld. Special shout out to him. I also want to thank everyone who supports the podcast. That includes people who tell their friends about it, people who write positive reviews on Apple Podcasts, and most of all those who have donated to support the show. I spend about 5 hours a week on each episode, and even though I love doing it, it can be hard to find the time. Without the support of my Patreon and PayPal Perpetual Chess partners, the show would not be possible. They are Adam Ralph, Adam Vrancoulge, Adrian Gutierrez, Andres Krizdewa, I hope I did okay there, Andres, on your name, Alex Pejas, Chris Wainscott, Chad Hilton, Chris Lott, Christopher Wood, Coach Jay's Chess Academy, Chris Flanagan, Daniel Naylor, Daniel Schaefer, Gary Andrews, Greg Shahadi, James Bonastia, Jason Dunbar, Jennifer Valens, Jeffrey Martello, John Fernandez, Jen Shahadi, Jen Scream, Jerry Wells, John Thompson, Johnny McMenamin, Kelly Palmer, Krishna Gopala Krishnan, Lorraine Dore, Matthew Passy, Macauley Peterson, Matthew Tedesco, Pascal Charbonneau, Paul Swaney, Peter Lux, Peter Merrifield, Randy Tempo, Ricky Grahalva, Rob Lazorchak, Robert Steiner, Tatyev Abrahamian, Thomas Stanix, Thomas Tachenko, Tim Seymour, Timothy Ha, Todd Bryant, Tony Rotello, Victor Vrancoul, Zhao Cheng, and Zhivko Stoyanov. Thanks a lot, everyone. I'll be back next week with another great interview.